C.T. Studd, Cricketer and Pioneer by Norman P. Grubb. Chapter 18. Forward Ever, Backward Never. In the Ituri forest, 4 days south of Nala, lived a big chief named Ebambi. It was evident that his village was the centre of a great population. To reach it, one walked for hours along a path where the virgin forest had been cleared back for 100 yards on each side. Lofty palm trees, with their beautiful crowns, grew everywhere in disordered profusion, and all along the pathway beneath their shade, nestling amongst banana trees, with their huge green leaves and great bunches of fruit, were myriads of the neatest of bamboo huts. These little dwellings were real works of art, with their bamboo walls tied together with fibre from the palm tree, leaf roof, and leaf door. There seemed to be simply no end to the people, their almost naked bodies shining with palm oil, their wiry black hair plaited with extreme care into all sorts of fantastic shapes, their curious long-shaped heads. Their sole clothing was a piece of very coarse bark cloth wrapped around their thighs. The men wore considerably more than the women, and on the heads of the men and boys wee straw hats, often plaited with beautiful colour designs and kept in place by long ivory hatpins. To the casual observer, they seem both happy and healthy as they shout out the news from one hut to another that a white man is passing, and men and women and boys and girls all pour out, spear and bow in hand, with the abandon of children, laughing and running and singing as they flock around his cycle. But experience tells a very different story. Stop in a village with a few medicines and see them come in. Children with sores from head to foot, men and women with gaping ulcers on their legs, the fingerless and toeless leper, babies with their little soft heads squeezed out of shape by the cord bound tightly around, according to the universal custom which demands that the shape of their heads must be not round but long and narrow. Talk to them and watch their faces, the furrows on the foreheads of the old men, not merely of old age, but of fear and darkness and devilry, gross sensuality and cruelty on nearly every face. Get inside their lives as best a white man may, and learn of the utter debauchery, so that neither lad nor girl is pure, who being past feeling have given themselves over into lasciviousness to work all uncleanness with greediness. The stranglehold of the witchcraft upon them, a mix of fear and murder and beastliness, fear of evil spirits all around them, murder because of their never-ending attempts to do away with neighbours or relatives by working witchcraft on them, and beastliness because of the unnameable rituals of these secret societies. Marriage almost always a purely business contract between father and suitor, bringing the father more wealth to buy himself another wife, and the husband a drudge and mother for his children. See their hopeless ignorance. They have never once heard of a God who loves and cares. They have no conception of holiness or heaven. They have never seen a book. And see yet one step further. See as God sees. See hearts that can be washed white as snow, and their very desires changed. See souls that can receive eternal life. See bodies that can be possessed by the Spirit of Christ and all their powers used to show Him forth. And then we see the divine urge that drove C.T. on to capture this good land for Christ. In 1922, he moved his headquarters to Ebambi. By now, he was famous for many miles around, the gaunt figure with a thick beard, aquiline nose, burning words, and yet merry laugh. He was as much the apostle to that region as Paul to Asia Minor, and they called him just Bwana Mukabwa, Great White Chief. Many are called Bwana, white chief, but none except he was ever Bwana Mukubwa. The missionaries used to call him Bwana for short, and we shall often use that name. Ibambi became the headquarters of the mission. He found the numbers and eagerness of the people to hear no whit exaggerated, and it can be imagined with what joy he threw himself into instructing them. Here was a chance to set the whole of the heart of Africa ablaze with the knowledge of the cross and the love of God. For such an end, all should go once again joyfully into the melting pot. There could be no talk of returning home. First to Ibambi itself, they came by the hundred to be taught and baptized. We were besieged by people coming for baptism. Almost every day one could hear the hymns of people coming from various directions. Then he began to go into the forest area around. He visited Mbai's, 5 hours from Ibambi, where the headman of the village had asked for a teacher. The sound of abundance of rain, he wrote. What music it is to tired hearts and heavy ears to hear the sound of hymn singing ever coming closer and closer, and then to see a band of men and women, boys and girls, who have marched 1 or 2 or 8 or 10 hours to hear the words of God. I found some 1,500 blacks, all packed tight as sardines, squatting on the ground in the sweltering midday African sun. No church nor shed was theirs. They are singing hymns to God with hearts and tongues and voices, a great untrained and unpaid choir, making better melody to God and to us than a choir of 1,000 Carusos. You watch their eager faces as they squat there, drinking in every word of the preacher. They are greedy for the gospel. A 2 hours meeting doesn't trouble them, unless it be that they consider it a scant measure. They were then sent for a rest for an hour. Then they turned up bright and greedy as ever for their second innings. Under our supervision, they built themselves a house of God to seat 1,250 people. It measured as much as a cricket pitch each way. They did it in record time. They had far to travel to get the grass for the roof, and were evidently tired. Said a crusader, would it not be well to send them home for a week and then let them return to finish? Certainly, tell them they've done well, and in 2 weeks' time they can come to finish the work. Their reply was, what, do you think we're going to undertake to build a house of God and are going home with it unfinished? At Adzangwe's, 3 hours away, it was the same. 500 or 600 go to his village of a Sunday to worship, wrote C.T. We had gone on a weekday and a crowd awaited us, and eagerly they listened as we taught them of sin and righteousness and judgment to come, and Jesus. Adzangwe had heard of the building of the Cricket Pit Church, and wanted one for his people that they might worship God in spite of storms and sun. And this is what he said to my fellow crusader. Bwana is now tired, and he is ill with his exertion over building the house of God at Mbai's. He must go and rest now, but afterwards will he come and teach us to build a house of God here? What answer could there be? No, Bwana is going home to England, where all have heard of Christ, and there are churches and chapels and mission rooms galore, and he is going to have to leave your people to rush headlong into hell? Could it be? One of my fellow crusaders held up a coin to explain the gift of salvation and said, the one who comes shall have it first. The reply he received gave him the shock of his life. But, sir, we have not come for money, but to hear the words of God. Another had spoken long, and as he closed he apologized. The voice of an old man came from midst of the black throng. Don't stop, sir, don't stop. Some of us are very old and have never heard these words before, and have but little time to hear in future. 6 other places were the same, Baduas, Bakondagamas, Adzokas, etc. Bwana had indeed found his El Dorado. Much pressure was brought to bear on him to persuade him to go home, but he had begun to reap a ripened harvest, and he would not be moved, neither now nor later. He always gave the same answer, that God had told him to come out when every voice was raised against him, and that only God could tell him when to go home. To one who reproved him for not going home, he wrote, "Had I cared for the comments of people, I should never have been a missionary, and there would never have been an HAM, the Heart of Africa Mission. As Micaiah said, the word that God gives me to speak, I shall speak. So also, the work that God gives me to do, I shall strive to accomplish or die in the attempt." Seeing that some 40 years ago, at God's command, I left mother, brethren, friends, fortune, and all that is usually thought to make life worth living, and have so continued ever since, have been called fool and fanatic again and again, yet lived to prove that the worldly counselors were the fools, I don't think I should much enjoy ending up in being frightened out of doing my duty by hearkening to the comments of men. Cursed is he that trusteth in man, does not make a very good pillow for a dying man, but there is much comfort in the other one. Blessed is he that trusteth in the Lord. And do you think that I can consent to turn a deaf ear to the cries of these people clamouring for the gospel and craving for teachers? If I can't send them teachers because there are no teachers to send, yet at least I can stop one yawning gap myself. If I'm not so efficient as youngsters, yet at least I may be more efficient than an absentee, a nobody. And if others have failed to hear and respond to these awful pleadings of sinful men going to hell, yet desiring to know the way to heaven, at least my presence can assure them that there are still some who to save them will count life and all they hold dear as of no account in comparison. God knows all about my health and need of a rest and need of many things regarded as absolutely necessary in order to live in these regions. I gladly laugh at being without them and rejoice in a living death with a marvellous joy, in order to fill the place that others have left unoccupied, whatever their reasons for so doing. In 1923, there were 40 crusaders on the field, so that, few though they were for this vast area, at least some further strategic points could be occupied in the Ituri province, and some stations had been opened at Deti, Ebambi, Wamba, Botongwe, and even Bomili and Panga in the far south, besides, of course, the 4 stations in the Well province. Yes, it had been well worthwhile to have obeyed God's call in 1913.